Every morning, as the sun stretched across the flat Texas plains, the quiet town of Lubbock stirred to life. Cars rumbled down Avenue Q, coffee steamed in diners, and children zipped past on bicycles. But just beyond the edge of the city's bustle, by the disused railway near an overgrown lot, sat Mary Ellen Carter. Wrapped in an old quilt, her silver hair tousled by the wind, Mary Ellen looked like she had always belonged to the land. Most people knew of her, but few knew her story. To some, she was a ghost from another time. To others, a madwoman best avoided. But those who passed her often enough noticed her habits. She fed the stray cats, talked to the trees, and kept a worn photograph close to her chest. It was a black and white portrait of a boy, no older than 10, smiling with front teeth missing. Despite the harsh winters and the merciless Texan heat, Mary Ellen never accepted help. Church volunteers came by with warm meals and blankets, but she rarely spoke. A few of them whispered rumors, drugs, mental illness, a missing child, but no one really knew the truth. The town moved on, and Mary Ellen remained, like an unanswered question in the corner of everyone's mind. That changed the day Jordan Reyes returned to Lubbock. Jordan was not a stranger to the city. Born and raised there, he had left after high school and returned now in his early 30s with a degree in social work and a drive to make a difference. His first assignment was a local outreach project, find and assist individuals who had slipped through the cracks. His list had just 3 names. At the top, written in faded pen, Mary Ellen Carter. She's been out there for years, warned a colleague at the office. Don't expect much. Folks have tried. But Jordan was persistent. Something about Mary Ellen's quiet presence gnawed at him. On his first visit, he approached gently, holding a coffee and a smile. She looked up, unsmiling, and said nothing. On the second visit, she accepted the coffee. On the third, she asked his name.
Jordan, he said.
Jordan Reyes. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as flint. You're not from the Carter side. It was the first clue. A name she recognized, a name she chose to speak. Jordan took it as an invitation, a crack in the wall. Over the following weeks, Jordan came often. He spoke about the town, the changing streets, the bakery on 50th that still sold pecan pie. Mary Ellen didn't share much, but her silences began to feel less like rejection and more like a test. Occasionally, she'd toss him a detail. My daddy worked the cotton fields, or that fence used to be red. Each one was a breadcrumb, a puzzle piece. Then, one afternoon, she asked, You ever lose someone, Jordan? He paused.
Yes.
My uncle. He just disappeared. She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. And with that, something shifted in her. The shadows behind her eyes deepened. She touched the photograph in her coat. You'll never understand why they let it happen, she said quietly. Not until you know what I did. Before Jordan could respond, she stood up and walked into the dusk, leaving only the echo of her words behind. Jordan knew now there was more to Mary Ellen's past than the town could ever imagine, and he was going to find it. The next morning, Jordan stood by the old railway, hoping Mary Ellen would return. The breeze carried the scent of dry earth and wild sunflowers, and the sky stretched endlessly above. But the spot where she usually sat was empty. He waited nearly an hour before giving up and walking back to his car. Something in her words from the night before haunted him. You'll never understand why they let it happen, not until you know what I did. Back at his office, he opened a case file that was so thin it barely seemed worth the paper. A few notes from charity groups, a medical record from a decade ago, and one report from the police, dated 26 years prior. A domestic disturbance. The name listed, Mary Ellen Carter. No charges filed. That was it. He needed more. So he did what any small-town native knew to do. He went to the public library. In the archives section, dusty newspapers were stored in giant binders. It took him hours, flipping through brittle pages with yellowing headlines, but eventually he found what he was looking for. The story was short, printed on page 7 of the Lubbock Herald. Local woman reports missing son. Mary Ellen Carter, a Lubbock resident, has reported her son, Thomas Carter, age 9, missing since Sunday evening. Authorities are investigating. The child was last seen wearing denim overalls and a red t-shirt. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Lubbock Police Department. There was a photo of her from years ago. Younger, face taut with fear, eyes wild with grief. That same photograph of the boy, the one she still carried, was printed beneath. Jordan stared at the image, heart thudding. A missing child, a grieving mother, and a town that, somehow, had chosen to forget. He photocopied the article and returned to the street where she usually stayed. Still no sign of her. That night, he couldn't sleep. He searched online records, public databases, old obituaries. But there was no death certificate for Thomas Carter. No school records past 1999. It was like the boy had vanished completely. 2 days later, Mary Ellen appeared again, sitting cross-legged on a crate beside the railway, as if she'd never left. "You were looking for me," she said without looking up. "I found your son's photo," Jordan said quietly, "in an old newspaper." She looked at him then. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with anger. "They said I was crazy," she whispered, "that I was confused, that he'd run away. But I knew he didn't leave on his own." Jordan crouched beside her. "What happened, Mary Ellen?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she picked up a pebble and turned it between her fingers. "My daddy," she said slowly, "was a man of the land. Worked sunup to sundown. Drank his supper. Said women ought to be quiet and boys ought to be tough." Jordan waited, silent, listening. "When I had Tommy, I swore I'd raise him different. But when I left my husband, I had no money, no job. My parents took me back in, but only on their terms." She stopped again. The wind blew strands of gray hair across her face. "They didn't like that Tommy cried at night. That he liked drawing more than playing ball.
Said he was weak.
Said I made him that way." Jordan's stomach turned. "One day," she continued, "I came home from my shift at the diner, and he was gone. They said he ran off. Just like that." There was a silence, heavy and thick. Mary Ellen gripped the pebble until her knuckles turned white. "I searched. I begged the police. But no one believed me. And eventually, the only way to stay near him was to stay here. Just in case he ever came back." Jordan felt the air pressing around them. He realized now this wasn't just about homelessness.
It was about a wound too deep to heal.
A betrayal buried so long that even the town had tried to forget it. But Jordan would not forget. Not now. It was the middle of the day when Jordan found himself parked in front of a weather-beaten farmhouse just outside Lubbock's city limits. The gravel drive was faded, and the white paint on the porch had peeled back to gray wood. But it was the roof that caught his attention. A rusted tin surface painted a long time ago in a shade of green that now looked almost sickly under the scorching sun. According to the property records, this had been Mary Ellen's childhood home. He stepped out of the car, boots crunching against the stones, and knocked on the door. It opened slowly. A woman stood there, older, maybe late 70s, with tightly set lips and eyes as sharp as barbed wire. "Can I help you?" she asked flatly. Jordan nodded. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Jordan Taylor. I'm writing a piece about homelessness in Lubbock. Mary Ellen Carter came up in my research." The name made the woman's face tighten like a clenched fist. "She's no daughter of mine," she said, and tried to shut the door. Jordan braced it gently with his hand.
"Please."
"I'm not here to accuse anyone. I want to understand." There was a pause. Then she sighed and opened the door halfway again. "You want to understand?" she said, voice shaking slightly. "Then you better understand that girl tore this family apart. She always thought she was better than the rest of us. Walked around like she knew something we didn't. And when that boy of hers disappeared, she tried to blame us. Her own parents." Jordan stared. "She lost her son. Don't you think?" "She didn't lose him. She failed him." "You think that's the same thing?" the woman hissed. "She walked out, left him with us while she worked night shifts and slept all day. How are we supposed to know he'd run off?" Jordan's voice turned cold. "You told the police he ran off. But there was no trace. No footprints. No belongings missing. He was 9. He wouldn't have gone far. The woman's eyes darkened, but she didn't answer. She simply stepped back and shut the door, slow and final. As Jordan drove away, the pit in his stomach grew heavier. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And not just in Mary Ellen's story, but in the whole way the town had behaved. He drove to the local police department and requested old records again. The officer on duty, an older man with a gut that stretched his badge, gave him a dismissive look. "You're wasting your time," the man said. Case was closed. Nothing ever came of it. "There was no closure," Jordan replied. "There was no body. No evidence. That's not closed." The officer grunted. "You think you know better than 20 years of officers?" "I think nobody wanted to dig," Jordan said, "because it would have meant pointing fingers at someone too close to home." The officer didn't answer, just stood up, turned around, and walked into the back room. That night, Jordan called Mary Ellen again. This time, she answered on the first ring. "I went to your family's house," he told her. Long silence. "I don't go near there," she said. "Not since the night it happened." "Mary Ellen, you've got to tell me. What really happened to Tommy?" Her voice was small, distant. "I left him there, just for the evening. I had a late shift. When I came back, Mama said he'd been asleep early. But when I went to his room..." She stopped. "He wasn't there." Another long pause. "And the sheets were clean, like someone had washed them. And the window, it was open, but the screen had been pushed out from the inside. They said he did it himself. But Tommy didn't know how to undo the locks." Jordan clenched his fists around the phone. "I should have screamed," she whispered. "I should have burned that house down looking for him. But I was so scared of losing everything, and they convinced me I was just broken." The call ended shortly after. And Jordan, now deep in this story, knew he had to find out what lay beyond that green-roofed house. Because someone wasn't just lying. Someone had made a child disappear and buried the truth beneath silence, shame, and Southern politeness. The next morning, Lubbock lay under a thick cloud cover, the air heavy with humidity and the threat of rain. Jordan parked his car outside the public library, a squat red brick building downtown, and made his way inside. He had a feeling something buried in Mary Ellen's past was waiting in print, hidden between brittle newspaper pages and forgotten community bulletins. The archives were musty and slow to navigate, but Jordan was patient. After hours of combing through microfiche reels and yellowed files, he found a small article from 21 years ago. "Local boy missing. Search underway." There was a grainy black and white photo. A young boy, around 9, with a crooked smile and a buzz cut. Tommy Carter. Jordan stared at the picture, letting the weight of it sink in. Then something caught his eye. Behind the boy, in the blurry background, stood a man. Not the focus of the picture. Not identified. Just there. Watching. Wearing a sheriff's badge. Jordan magnified the image. It was faint but clear enough. It was the same man who had dismissed him at the station the day before. Deputy Sheriff Glenn McCrae. The pieces began to twist. 21 years ago, McCrae had already been a deputy. He would have overseen the investigation into Tommy's disappearance. And now, he was the one trying to push Jordan out, telling him the case was closed. Jordan printed the photo and took it back to his motel. He pinned it above his desk, next to his scribbled notes and highlighted timelines. He called Mary Ellen again. "I found a photo," he said, "of Tommy, from when he went missing. Sheriff McCrae is in the background." Silence. "I thought it might have been coincidence," he continued, "but he was on the case. Did you ever notice anything strange about him?" Mary Ellen took a shaky breath. "I told them not to let him near the case," she said slowly. "After Tommy went missing, I told them he made me uncomfortable. He used to visit when my daddy was out, always checking in on me. Standing too close. Saying things that didn't feel right. But they said I was just grieving." Jordan felt his blood run cold. "You never told anyone else?" "I tried. But back then, no one wanted to listen to a poor girl who already lost her mind over a missing child." Jordan hung up and stared at the photo again. He needed evidence, real evidence. But he also knew that whatever had happened back then, the silence around it had been deliberate. Someone had protected McCrae. Maybe multiple people. He headed back to the sheriff's department, but this time didn't ask for help. Instead, he went to the public records room attached to City Hall. It took some convincing, but eventually a bored clerk let him scan through personnel files. McCrae's name popped up dozens of times, mostly commendations, nothing out of place. But then, one thin folder from around the time of Tommy's disappearance stood out. It had been flagged for internal review, though no action had followed. Inside, Jordan found a statement from a fellow deputy, dated a week after Tommy vanished. The handwriting was rough, but legible. Deputy McCrae was at the Carter residence alone on 2 occasions without warrant or request. I raised concerns but was told to drop it. He seemed agitated, told me the boy was trouble anyway. Jordan photocopied the statement and tucked it in his bag. As he left the building, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then heavier. But Jordan didn't run for cover. He stood still, letting it wash over him, mind racing. The town had protected a predator. And Tommy Carter might not just be a lost child. He might have been silenced to protect the reputation of someone in uniform. Back at the motel, Jordan stared out the rain-fogged window. He could almost hear Mary Ellen's voice from the last call, raw with grief and worn from years of guilt. He whispered to no one, "I'll find out what happened to him. I swear." Because now it wasn't just a story. It was justice. And it was long overdue. The rain had not let up by the next morning, and the clouds over Lubbock hung low, gray and ominous. Jordan stood in front of the Carter family's old house again. It looked even more neglected than before, its windows dull and walls scarred by years of neglect. But now, Jordan had a new purpose. Something was being hidden here. He could feel it. He knocked on the door again, and once more, Mary Ellen answered. This time, her eyes were different. Tired, yes, but also alert, as if the call from the night before had unlocked something she had buried deep. "I need to ask you something," Jordan said gently. "Is there any place in this house that was ever off limits? A room you were told to stay away from? Something that didn't make sense when Tommy disappeared?" Mary Ellen didn't answer immediately. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway, to a door at the end of it. "My daddy used to lock that one," she said quietly. "Said it was just for tools. But I never saw him carry tools in or out." Jordan followed her gaze. The door was plain, painted the same faded white as the rest of the hallway, but the lock had been replaced at some point with a much newer one. Strange, considering the state of the rest of the house. "Do you have the key?" She shook her head. "Not to that one." "I'm sorry," Jordan said, "but I need to see inside." Mary Ellen nodded slowly. "Do what you have to." Jordan returned to his car, rummaged through the emergency toolkit in the boot, and grabbed a crowbar. The wood around the lock gave way easier than he expected. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. He paused, heart pounding. Then he stepped inside. The air was thick and stale. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight. The staircase creaked underfoot as he descended, each step sounding like a warning. At the bottom, he found a small basement room. There were no windows, just bare concrete walls and an old metal cot pushed against one corner. A rusted chair sat in the middle, and on the far wall, deep scratches marred the surface, like someone had clawed at it desperately. Jordan felt the bile rise in his throat. On a shelf, he found something even worse. A child's shoe. A stack of Polaroids, yellowed and curled. He flipped through them with shaking hands. They were of Tommy. Some taken in daylight, others in dim lighting, some with him smiling, others with his eyes red from crying. The last one. Tommy was sleeping. Or maybe unconscious. Jordan couldn't tell. He stumbled back up the stairs, nearly tripping on the way out. Mary Ellen met him in the hallway, her face pale. "There was a room," Jordan whispered. "They kept him down there." Tears welled in her eyes. "I always heard something. But my daddy would tell me it was the house settling. I wanted to believe him. Jordan took her gently by the arm and led her to the living room. "Mary Ellen, do you know where your father is buried?" "In the family plot, out near Cotton Creek." "I need to go there," Jordan said. "I think the truth is buried with him." That afternoon, Jordan drove out to the cemetery just outside town. The land was flat and quiet, and the graves stood in uneven rows. He found Thomas Carter's name etched into an old headstone, the dirt around it freshly disturbed from recent landscaping.
He knelt down.
The wind picked up. There was something under the ground here, something more than a coffin and bones. Jordan could feel it. Secrets too dark to die.
He stood up and looked around.
Just a few rows away, a figure stood watching. It was McCrae.
No uniform this time.
Just jeans, boots, and a pale shirt. But his stance was unmistakable. Confident. Cold. "Looking for ghosts, Mr. Hayes?" he called across the graves. Jordan walked over, slow and steady. "I found your photo in the archive. Found your name in the deputy report. Found the room under the house." McCrae didn't flinch. "You think you're going to bring it all back up? Stir the town? Drag everyone through the mud? I think I'm going to make sure Tommy Carter is never forgotten again." McCrae's eyes narrowed. "Be careful where you dig. This town covers its own." He turned and walked away. But Jordan knew now, this wasn't just a story about a missing boy. It was about a community that let him vanish, a silence enforced by fear and power. And he had just started to break it. That night, Jordan could not sleep. He paced the small motel room, the sound of the rain tapping against the window growing more erratic as the hours passed. His mind was racing with questions, fragments of truth slowly forming a grim picture. McCrae. The name had been a whisper in the background of every interview, every report, every piece of paper related to Tommy Carter's disappearance. He was always there, just outside the frame. Never mentioned directly, but never truly absent either. Jordan pulled out his laptop and opened the local news archives again. He dug deeper. McCrae's name finally surfaced in an unrelated 1989 article, a commendation for his dedication to youth outreach and community safety. The article included a photo of him in uniform, smiling beside a group of children. And there, in the corner of the photo, stood Tommy Carter. Looking uncomfortable, his body half turned away from McCrae, eyes not quite meeting the camera. Jordan froze. He took a screenshot and compared it to the Polaroids from the basement. Same face. Same eyes. Tommy had known him, trusted him, or at least had been told to trust him. It all began to make sense. McCrae had used his position, his badge, and his reputation to gain access, to silence questions, to intimidate those who suspected. And when Tommy disappeared, McCrae had been among the first to search for him, probably directing the effort away from where Tommy actually was. Jordan sat back, sickened. This wasn't just about silence. It was about complicity, a system that protected itself at the cost of the most vulnerable. He picked up his phone and dialed Officer Rhodes. "Hayes," she answered, her voice weary. "It's late." "I know. I found the basement, at the Carter house, and I found more on McCrae." There was a pause. "I figured you might," she said finally. "I've been trying to get something on him for years. But everything vanishes, files, evidence, even complaints." Jordan blinked. "You knew." "I suspected. You don't work in this town long without feeling the rot under the surface. But no one wants to see it, especially when it wears a badge." Jordan exhaled. "We need to make it public. Then you better be ready for a war. Because this town doesn't take kindly to people pulling back the curtain." The next morning, Jordan walked straight into the Lubbock police station with a USB stick containing digital scans of everything he had found: photos, documents, testimonies, maps of the Carter property, copies of the old sheriff's reports. Rhodes met him at the door, looking both nervous and resolved. Inside, they sat down with the chief. At first, the chief dismissed them. "You're talking about a respected retired officer," he said. "McCrae served this department with honor." Jordan slid the photo across the desk, the group picture with Tommy, and the Polaroid of Tommy in that same shirt, days or weeks later in the basement. The chief's expression changed. He looked at Rhodes. "You knew about this?" I had my suspicions. No one would listen. And now? Jordan asked. The chief rubbed his temples. Now, I'll have to. It wasn't a full victory. Not yet. But it was a start. Within hours, the evidence was sealed for review. A task force was mentioned. Names began surfacing: McCrae's close friends, former deputies, city officials. The town was no longer quiet. But then, the calls began. Jordan received the first voicemail that night. A gruff, distorted voice. You need to leave this alone. Go back to your coast. Or we'll bury you in the same dirt as the boy. He played it twice. Then deleted it. Because he knew he was too deep to back out now. The morning air in Lubbock was heavy with tension. Jordan could feel it the moment he stepped out of the motel. The town, once indifferent to his presence, now watched him. Eyes lingered a second too long. Conversations stopped when he walked past. It was no longer suspicion, it was warning. At the diner, his usual seat at the counter was taken. The waitress, normally chatty, barely nodded. A man in a mechanic's uniform stared at him from across the room, his jaw tight, his arms crossed. They knew. And they were angry. Jordan returned to his car, every instinct screaming to leave. But he had one more place to visit, the site of the old community center where McCrae had volunteered. It had burned down in 1993, the cause listed as electrical failure. But in the reports, Jordan had noticed something odd. The fire marshal's name had been blacked out in the copy. That had not happened by accident. The center was nothing now but a concrete foundation overrun by weeds. But as he stepped onto the cracked slab, a memory surfaced, something from the interview with an old neighbor. McCrae used to take boys there. Always boys. Said they needed structure. Structure. Control. Silence. Jordan paced the remains, then crouched beside a rusted pipe protruding from the ground. Beneath it, half buried under soot and earth, something caught the light. A bracelet. Plastic. Faded. Child-sized. Jordan slipped it into his pocket. Back in the car, he called Officer Rhodes again. I found something at the community center. It's small, but it's not nothing. Rhodes sighed. We're getting pressure. Chief's already being told to shut it down. No credible evidence of wrongdoing. Jordan's fingers curled around the steering wheel. There is evidence. It's just buried under 30 years of favors and fear. I know, but these people don't want the truth. They want peace. And peace here means pretending nothing ever happened. Jordan looked at the horizon. Flat, endless. He could run. He could leave it all behind and no one would blame him. But he also remembered Tommy's face in that Polaroid. The fear in his eyes. The silence in his scream. I'm not leaving, he said. Not until the truth is louder than their silence. That evening, Jordan met with the last person on his list, Eli Sanderson. He was a janitor now at a local school, but in the late 1980s, he had worked maintenance at the community center. Eli was cautious at first, but when Jordan showed him the bracelet, something shifted in his eyes. I remember that, he said. One of the boys, Tyler something, he wore that thing every day. Until one night, he just stopped showing up. They said he moved. But I never believed it. Jordan leaned forward. What happened to the center, Eli? Eli looked down, then at the cracked ceiling of his tiny flat. You ever hear screaming and tell yourself it's just the wind? He asked quietly. That's what we all did. We knew, but we told ourselves we didn't. Because if we did, then we were responsible. He gave Jordan a box, old keys, a journal, some staff schedules. One entry, dated July 17, 1988, simply read, McCrae. Locked south wing. Do not enter. Jordan took the box, heart pounding. He thanked Eli, stepped out, and nearly walked into a man in a dark jacket. The man didn't speak, just stood there, blocking his path, eyes cold. Jordan stepped aside. The man didn't move. Jordan turned back, heart racing. The man spoke then. A single sentence. You're digging too deep. And he walked away. Jordan stood frozen. Because this was no longer a secret. It was a threat. And now, they were coming into the light. The following morning, The town of Lubbock was awash with a deceptive calm. The sun was bright, the sky cloudless, but for Jordan, it felt like the air had thickened, like he was breathing through gauze. He had crossed a line. No more quiet interviews or ignored messages. Now he was being watched,
Followed. Warned.
the box Eli had given him the night before sat open on the motel bed. Among the crumbling documents was one that caught his attention, a staff roster from 1988. There was a handwritten note next to McCrae's name. 2 letters, faint but unmistakable. RH. Jordan stared. His mind raced. Could it be Rhodes? No, he had been too young. But what if it was his father? A former officer? Someone else in the department? The rot was deeper than he thought. He needed to act quickly. Jordan drove to the old Lubbock County Records office, one of the few places left that still kept paper archives. He spent hours poring over police rosters, internal memos, and incident reports. Dust clung to his fingers. His eyes stung. But then he found it. A 1988 memo regarding an internal complaint. Officer R. Harlan. Alleged interference with abuse investigation. Recommendation: no further action. R. Harlan. Rhodes' father. It was a punch to the gut. Jordan called Rhodes. You didn't tell me your father was involved. There was a long pause. I didn't know you'd find that. So it's true? He was part of the original investigation, Rhodes admitted, voice low. But the department buried it. They said it would ruin lives. Reputations. Jordan gritted his teeth. It did ruin lives. Just not the ones they cared about. That evening, Jordan returned to Eli's flat, hoping for more answers. But Eli didn't answer the door. It was ajar. Inside, the lights were off. Furniture overturned. The smell of stale sweat and panic filled the room. Jordan stepped in cautiously. Eli? Silence. He searched the flat. On the kitchen floor, he found the box, papers scattered, burned at the edges. But something had been left behind. A photograph, warped with heat, barely intact. It showed McCrae with a group of boys, maybe 6 or 7 years old, at the community center. Standing slightly apart was a boy wearing the same bracelet Jordan had found, Tyler. And next to him was a man Jordan had never seen before.
Tall. Beard.
Eyes hidden by dark sunglasses. He flipped the photo over. On the back, in a child's handwriting. Tyler. Last summer before I went away. Don't forget me. Jordan's breath caught. Tyler had never moved. He had disappeared. And someone had helped make sure no one asked questions. Suddenly, the air shifted. A sound behind him. Jordan turned, too late. The blow caught him across the side of the head. Darkness crashed in. When he awoke, he was in the boot of a car. Cramped. Cold. His wrists were tied. The engine hummed. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. He tried to move. The pain was blinding. But he forced himself to focus. He had to stay awake. He had to remember. He whispered to himself. Tyler.
Tommy.
Eli. Don't let it end like this. Eventually, the car stopped. The boot opened. Light stabbed his eyes. A man stood over him. Not McCrae. Not Rhodes. Someone else. Someone older. I warned you, the man said, voice flat. You just wouldn't stop. Jordan spat blood. Who are you? The man didn't answer. He just raised a phone. Showed him a photo, Tommy's photo. The one from the Polaroid. Then he spoke 3 words that made Jordan's blood run cold. He's still alive. And everything Jordan thought he knew unraveled in an instant. The smell of dirt filled Jordan's nose. He was dragged from the boot of the car and thrown onto hard, cracked ground. The landscape around him was desolate. West of Lubbock, perhaps, he guessed, an old farm or abandoned oil field. There were no buildings in sight. Just a rusting windmill and scattered weeds that hadn't seen rain in years. His captor loomed over him, eyes shadowed beneath a dusty hat. I want you to listen carefully, son, the man said, cutting the zip ties from Jordan's wrists. Because after this, there's no turning back. Jordan sat up slowly, his head throbbing. Where is he? Where's Tommy? The man didn't answer. Instead, he lit a cigarette and watched the smoke twist in the air. I did what I had to. The system didn't care. Those boys were getting torn up in places meant to protect them. You think a few news articles will fix any of that? Jordan shook his head, trying to make sense of it. You're saying you took Tommy? I saved him, the man said. I saved a few of them. The ones I could. Jordan's heart pounded. Then where is he now? The man gestured toward the hills. Follow the ridge. You'll find an old bunker. Left over from Cold War drills. That's where we kept them. Until it got too hot. We's? The man smiled bitterly. You think one person could hide that many boys for that long? Jordan rose, muscles stiff. He looked around. Why now? Why bring me here? The man's jaw tensed. Because Eli's dead. The words hit Jordan like a bullet. What? They got to him.
Same way they're trying to get to you.
He was going to run, take the rest of the files with him. They couldn't risk it. Jordan staggered, rage and grief mixing in his chest. So now what? You want me to stop? I want you to choose, the man said, dropping a battered journal at Jordan's feet. You can publish everything.
Names. Dates.
Photos. But you'll be painting targets on a lot of backs. Or you can let it lie. Let those who survived live in peace. Jordan picked up the journal. Pages were brittle with age, stained with ink and dried blood. Inside were names, details, testimonies, a handwritten map. He flipped through it until he saw the one name that mattered most. Thomas Avery. He was listed as extracted in 1997. Then again in 2001. No death date. No transfer. Just one word beneath his name. Safe. Tears stung Jordan's eyes.
He looked up at the man.
Is this real? As real as it gets. Jordan walked toward the ridge, the sun low behind him, casting long shadows across the barren land. He followed the winding trail, heart pounding, until he saw it. A narrow opening, barely noticeable, built into the side of the hill. Steel reinforced. Heavy. He hesitated, then pushed. It creaked open. The air inside was cool. Musty. He stepped down into the darkness. Faint lights flickered. A row of bunks. Old canned food. Children's drawings on the wall. And then he heard a voice. Who are you? A man stepped from the shadows. His beard was thick, hair matted. He was thinner than in the photo, but the eyes were the same. Jordan's throat tightened. Tommy? The man stared. That name hasn't been used in years. Jordan took a step closer. It's me. Jordan. From Ridgewood. A long pause. Then, recognition. Jordan. Tommy's voice cracked. You're still alive? Jordan nodded, tears threatening to spill. Tommy looked away, swallowing hard. They told me everyone forgot. That no one would ever come. I didn't forget. Silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Tommy lowered his head. Then I guess you're here to finish the story. Jordan nodded.
Together.
Behind them, the light above the door flickered once, then steadied. The past wasn't buried. It had been waiting. For the first time in decades, Lubbock was quiet. Not the silence of ignorance or denial, but the eerie calm before a reckoning. Jordan and Tommy sat at a rusted metal table in the underground bunker, lit only by a hanging lantern. Dust floated in the air like ghosts of all the children who had passed through these walls. Jordan's recorder was on, though neither had spoken for minutes. Tommy finally broke the silence. They used to tell us we were lucky, that we'd been chosen. But it wasn't luck, was it? Jordan kept his eyes on Tommy.
No.
It was survival. Tommy handed over a small USB drive, old but intact. This has everything. Footage. Letters.
Testimonies.
Even scanned files from the archives they tried to burn. We risked everything to keep this. Jordan took it gently, as if it might shatter from the weight of truth. I'm going to publish it, he said. Tommy nodded.
Good.
But promise me one thing.
What?
That you won't forget us once the world moves on. Jordan hesitated. Never. Outside, the sun had begun to rise. When they emerged, The sky was painted in streaks of orange and gold. A new day. A real one. Back in Lubbock, Jordan went to the one place he knew would be safe, Eli's old newsroom. He powered up an ancient desktop and inserted the drive. Password protected. Tommy leaned in and typed it with shaking fingers. Ghosts. The files opened, row after row. Jordan's eyes welled with tears. Names he'd never heard. Faces he couldn't forget. And there, tucked into a folder marked Jordan, was a video. He clicked play. It was him, 8 years old, sitting in a blue plastic chair. Face dirty, eyes hollow. Say your name, a voice off camera said. Jordan Michael Ellis. What happened to you, Jordan? I got taken away. But it wasn't safe. They said they'd help. But they didn't. The boy looked straight into the camera.
Please.
Don't forget us. Jordan covered his mouth. Tommy put a hand on his shoulder. You asked why I kept the tape. That's why. They spent the next hours uploading files, sending them to newsrooms, human rights organizations, advocacy groups. By dusk, the story had gone global. Headlines screamed across screens. Children hidden in plain sight. The foster system's forgotten victims. Texas town faces reckoning after mass cover-up. Outside, reporters crowded the old building. Camera lights flashed. Jordan stepped out with Tommy behind him. He cleared his throat. You'll find everything you need in the documents. Every name, every date, every lie. This isn't just Lubbock's secret. It's America's. A reporter asked, Will there be arrests? Jordan answered, There must be, or this cycle never ends. Tommy added quietly, Some of us survived. That doesn't mean we lived. The world was finally listening. Days passed. Investigations launched. Several officials were arrested. Families came forward, recognizing lost sons and daughters from the files. Jordan remained in Lubbock, helping connect the dots, helping survivors find their voices. Tommy, for the first time in his adult life, stood outside in daylight without flinching. He volunteered at a shelter, his name cleared and identity restored. One morning, weeks later, Jordan received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Thank you. Because of you, I found my brother. He was alive. We thought he was dead. We thought we all were. Signed simply, one of the ghosts. Jordan folded the letter, pressed it to his chest, and looked out over the city that had nearly broken him. But it hadn't. The story was no longer his burden alone. It belonged to the world now. And the ghosts at last had names.